Ma'Khia Bryant and Adam Toledo are two names you've likely heard a lot in recent days, as the media blasted out stories of these two teens who died in police shootings. The headlines basically wrote themselves. Racist cop shoots unarmed minority. But in both cases, the stories were completely false. After the media and even the White House painted the picture of Bryant as a child who was involved in a knife fight and died at the hands of a racist police officer, we got body cam footage that told a completely different story. After the officer arrived, Bryant lunged with a knife at another black girl she had pinned against a car, right after she had just charged another black girl nearby. The police officer fired and saved at least one black girl's life. Adam Toledo was a similar story. Body cam footage showed after the fact showed that this unarmed teen actually had a handgun. Even after we learned these details, the media still tried to cover it up. CBS News cropped out the part of the video that showed Toledo had a gun, and NBC News highlighted Bryant's knife on the ground when the footage clearly shows her wielding it against another person at the moment she was shot. These stories aren't flukes, and corrupt media and politicians aren't surprised or embarrassed when their initial reporting gets debunked. That's because they don't so much report as feed people a narrative. If anyone does issue corrections, they're pretty stealthy and get buried instantly. And so the narrative is set before we even know the details. And narratives are way more powerful than facts in ginning up emotional responses. The media know this, and the ruling class knows this. If they can convince enough people that America is systemically racist, they can infiltrate government schools with critical race theory. And they have. If they can make people believe that police officers are irredeemably evil, they can nationalize local law enforcement and funnel funds toward their pet social programs. And they're trying. And if they can convince corporations that performative anti-racism is more important than profits, they can blackmail state politicians into passing laws that give them more power. And they are. Not only that, but they have no problem ratcheting up racial tensions, even where they don't exist, that stretch Americans until they snap, to the point of looting, violence, and all-out destruction in the name of so-called justice. Make no mistake, these politicians and celebrities and so-called journalists are inciting violence. And these are the same people who insisted Donald Trump incited an insurrection. They know that the best way to get clicks and rally support for their political agendas is to create unrest. And the best way to do that is to convince people that isolated instances of evil represent huge institutional problems through their inflammatory rhetoric. It's a strategy, and it works. They did it with Michael Brown in 2014. To this day, hands up, don't shoot is a leftist talking point and a protest chant, even though that narrative turned out to be totally false. They did it with Jacob Blake, too, lying about the whole situation to turn it into a racist cop narrative. And the town of Kenosha went up in flames. And these race baiters don't just conjure up police brutality to create racial division. They'll use whatever they can. Remember when the Jussie Smollett hoax dominated the news cycle, and Kamala Harris and Cory Booker called it a modern-day lynching? Talk about inflammatory. Remember the noose in NASCAR driver Bubba Wallace's garage that turned out to be a normal door pull? The media do the same with riot porn, glamorizing filth and demonizing law and order. It's why we saw glowing coverage of the nude protester planting herself in the street and spreading her legs to a line of police officers. Not to mention, in whitewashing crime, the left encourages it. They said destroying property is not violence. They said protests don't need to be peaceful, and that rioting is a proportionate response. They denied evidence of anarchy. They said violence works. They condemned the term riot as loaded, instead calling it democracy. They released a documentary claiming riots built America. And they flat out pretended cities weren't being ravaged. Governor Jay Inslee said, "That's news to me," when asked about the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone in his state's largest city. And Jerry Nadler called Antifa a myth. And the left doesn't just create unrest and fan the flames of racial division with sins of commission. They do it with sins of omission as well. That's why you'll hear Ma'Khia Bryant's name way more than you'll hear Mohammed Anwar's. His life was stolen by two black teens when they violently carjacked him in broad daylight in Washington, D.C. last month. One story can be spun to further the narrative that foments riots. The other one cannot. While the left loves to talk about Donald Trump inciting a violent insurrection and sedition with his so-called big lie about the 2020 election, the truth is the left has incited way more violence than Trump ever did. And they do it through a way bigger lie. That the entire United States of America, with all its white people, police officers, history, institutions, and norms is irredeemably racist and evil to its core. When you can convince people that racism is rampant and that silence about it is violence, while actual physical vigilante violence is justice, you ignite a flame of division and destruction that can only end with bodies on the ground and cities leveled. As Shelby Steele says, America's original sin is not slavery. It is simply the use of race as a means to power. And while the ruling classes exploit tragedy to accrue more and more power, Americans become increasingly powerless as pawns in the race war, many paying with their sanity, others with their livelihoods, and some even with their lives. Be sure to check out this article on the Federalist website, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and follow us on Twitter at FDRLST.